Welcome back. This is Jeremiah Lee and Randy Barkley, and we're going to be talking in this particular segment. We're going to be talking about how do you retire in a very volatile stock market time. I mean, this is a time when people just stepping into retirement or have been in it for just a little bit, and all of a sudden you see all this volatility. And what do you do, right, Jeremiah?
Yeah, what do you do? Well, and this is, I think, pertinent for a lot of people because retirement, you can flex it by a couple years, right? There's some people who retired early because of COVID items. There's some people who will keep working a couple of years. But for the majority of folks, within a couple of year time window, that's your retirement period. And if you walk into that retirement period and the economy's down, you have some choices. The hardest, and this is kind of what we're talking about, is when you make the decision to retire. You do it. You say, yep, this is a good moment. You retire, and then the economy tanks. And what was this nest egg that you say you had, $600,000, $1 million in a nest egg, and said, this is going to get me through. You did the math, you figured it all out, and then all of a sudden, the economy tanks, and that number is shrinking. And at the same time, you're having to take out money to live. And that's the dynamic that is the scariest for most retired folks.
Right. And I think, again, looking back at it, every household is different. We deal a lot with this with clients, and we have a lot of clients who are just entering into retirement. So we try to fix a period of time or set aside enough money so they have a cushion to go into that early stages of retirement. But there are some things that happen within the market, like what we've had over this last year or so, that people are very fearful of. Are they going to run out of money? And the issue is the first thing we want to tell people, don't panic.
Yeah.
Don't make drastic changes and decisions. But also there's a methodology to how you decrease your risk, but then you start to increase your exposure over time, right?
Yeah, right. There's a number of things we'll get through, but and the don't panic, I think that's just the biggest one to emblazon on people's minds. The worst option would be to retire, have the market fall, get worried, see the market fall further, and then sell everything and move to cash to say, I can't take it. Well, you've just accepted all those losses and you've avoided all future gains. I mean, that is a really tough moment. And part of, I think, the benefit of having an advisor in your life is someone is to say, okay, this is the long-term picture. It's scary now, it's hard now, but this is the long-term picture. So one option is the one you just mentioned is there's a number of advisors who will have you go into very low risk assets for the first 3 or 4 years of retirement, either high bonds or even cash at times, and have your equity portion maybe be 20% of your portfolio, very slim. But then as you get further into retirement, they start increasing that equity portion, which seems backwards to a lot of people. But the idea being the number of years you need to stretch your money is decreasing as you're getting older. And your ability to take on some of this risk, now that you've got through those first years, it increases. So to increase your equity portion is a great way.
Right.
Another way that I like a lot is to just think of it, and this is kind of what you're saying a little bit too, is Randy, is think of it in different buckets. And so one option is say 0 to 15 years is one bucket, and then 15 to 30 years is the next bucket. Well, that 15 to 30 year bucket, that can be invested. You don't have to worry about that. You're not going to use that money for years. Whereas the first bucket, you'd be more conservative about it because you're going to start using it. We don't have that big of buckets. We'll often do a 2-year bucket and a 3-year bucket and a greater bucket. And that allows those smaller buckets in the future to have a greater risk because you're not going to touch them for a long time. But you have that stability in those first few buckets. And everyone's different, so it kind of depends on your total lifestyle.
Yeah, and everybody, like you said, everybody's different. What I have found a lot, and this is something that is very common, and I think it's a really strong common denominator, is that when you step into retirement, you don't have any installment debt remaining. So if it's possible, we look at a lot of different scenarios and case studies, and we find that people that carry a mortgage into retirement, it creates more instability in their cash flow because that requirement, their house is not paid for, therefore they have to continue to make that house payment. The other one too, which we can talk more about, but that is you delay in other words, work long enough and you delay your Social Security benefits to a older age. If you can go all the way to age 70, albeit great, But a lot of people, they start pulling that Social Security benefit too early, and they end up accepting a much larger
Mm.
payout for the rest of their life.
Yeah, much lower payout over time. Yeah, and I think if clients don't have their mortgage paid off, it's not the end of things. It's just a huge
Right.
benefit that gives them a lot more freedom to decide how they spend their funds. The other aspect, similar to the installment note, is the cost that they can control. So if they're retired and the economy goes well, let's get the new kitchen. Let's get the new roof. Let's do the things they wanted to do. If the economy goes down, to say, okay, we need to wait a couple of years on these, wait for the economy to recover before we start pulling out those extra funds. And that's a controllable cost. My favorite, and I think yours as well, is when you have clients that have done the maintenance on their home over time, and they get to a point where they're retiring and their house is paid for and it's updated the way that they'd want it. That is a really great place to be retiring into. It's not possible for everyone, but that's a really good spot.
Yeah, I mean, right now we're working with a client who wants to retire, and there's 11 years difference between him and his spouse. And he's at full retirement age. That means he can receive the full benefit from Social Security. But the medical cost for his wife after he steps
Mm.
into retirement is a real expense that they have to deal with. So one of our suggestions to them is he works with a company that has already expressed a desire for him to stay on as a consultant after his full retirement date. He's reluctant to do that. He feels like he's going to be sucked back into the full-time work, but only get paid part-time wages. And I said, no, you have to set your boundaries and your parameters. But the benefit of showing it in the plan is that just that additional dollars allows them to be able to transition while she gets closer to that age of Medicare age, because
Mhm.
medical expenses are a real expense and they're continuing to rise for most households. So like you're saying, every household's different. Everybody has a different outcome. The question is how do we structure the assets and the income flow and the expenses? What's the buckets? How are we filling the buckets? How we use those? That has a big, it's the leverage that you want to your advantage as you step into retirement, isn't it?
Yeah. And for a lot of folks, they think investing, I need to get my investing better. And that's true. I mean, that's a big part of what we do is the actual investing. But I feel like that planning piece that you just spoke about, that planning piece is so significant to build the confidence, especially when you have a married couple, to build that confidence between them to say, we're going to be okay. We know
Right.
what the variables are. We know where our risk is. Because if you don't know exactly where it is, the risk just feels like it's everywhere. And there's
Right.
just this uncertainty and angst. But when you can narrow down and say, oh, no, this is our risk. It's right here. Then we can deal with it. And emotionally, I feel like clients can deal with it. So that's, in my mind, that's the two-pronged piece of, you have to have the good investments, of course, but the planning that goes with it is what gives you the confidence to stay the course when the going gets tough. And that's a big part of building that confidence.
And I mean, obviously, managing debt and having adequate money sitting in cash accounts and buckets that you can draw from and be able to stabilize you through these periods of time without dipping into, like you're saying earlier, you don't want to sell assets that have already reduced in value. And then it really does hamper your overall return, and the value of your assets down time. Got to give yourself time, and you got to give yourself time and allow assets to go through their normal ebbs and flows. You've been listening to Randy Barkley, Jeremiah Lee. We're with Tricord Advisors. We're a registered investment advisory firm, and we're here to help you make smart decisions about your money.